Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing the album Light of Day, Day of Darkness by the band Green Carnation.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Now you should know that this is one continuous track which is 1 hour long, so all the favorite bits on here come from the same track from this album, so enjoy. So this is Light of Day, Day of Darkness, and as I said, this album consists of one track which is 1 hour and 6 seconds long, and although it's pretty long, I specifically think that this is an amazing album / song, made very masterfully, and I think there's a lot to say about it. Now before we get into the music on here, let's talk about who are Green Carnation. Now they're a band that have been active from the mid-90s, they're doing progressive metal mostly, and in the year 2000 they released their first debut album called Journey to the End of the Night, and this is a 70-minute conceptual album that was inspired by the tragic loss of the guitarist's daughter. Now we're going to talk about this guitarist a lot because he is also the lyricist for this album, and his name is Terje Vikskje, which is a Norwegian name, but we will call him, as he is usually referred as, Short. Now, why am I telling you about this other album that they made about the loss of his daughter? Well, this album that we're listening to today is also somewhat inspired by the tragic loss of George's daughter, but this one, unlike the last album, also focuses on the birth of his son. He has a new son right now, and this album basically talks about that. And after knowing these things, you can really get a better understanding about the lore and the idea of the conceptuality of this album, and of course the music found on it. Now before we move on to actually talking about the music found on here, let's talk about the name Light of Day, Day of Darkness. At least as I see it, I think this one refers to the daughter and the new son of Chort, when Light of Day is basically bringing forth a new life into the world, which is his son, and the Day of Darkness is the day in which he lost his daughter. And I think that both of these names, they basically refer to the entire conceptual idea and the conflict found on this album, which deals with the acceptance of new life and the mourning over a life that was lost. And with all of this knowledge, let's get right into the music. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to dissect this piece in 10-minute intervals. So I'm going to go from the 0 point to 10 minutes, from 10 minutes to 20, and so on until we reach the end, which is, as I said, 1 hour and 6 seconds long. Now don't get me wrong, this piece isn't dissected and divided into several parts. This is one long continuous piece. Just for the comfort of myself and you guys, I'm gonna dissect it in these parts so we can actually talk about it more chronologically and it would be easier for us to understand. So the first 10 minutes of this track, they don't consist of a lot of things, but what I do have to mention about them is firstly the baby noises that start off this album. This is actually Chortz's son, his new son that was born after the tragic loss of his daughter. He is recorded and put on this album, symbolizing what I suppose is the light of day of the new life. Now, we also feature to the vocals on here, and I do believe that they have somewhat to be desired, but they don't ruin this album and they're not bad at all. They're not the greatest in the world, but I guess that's fine. And I like this song because it already features something that would recur later on in this piece. This is not heavy metal, this is not hardcore metal, this actually goes from heavy to light metal in a lot of ways. it tries to shift and keep itself very interesting and energetic and give you some leeway in order to appreciate the more hard-hitting moments with the more calmer moments. And I love when bands do that, especially on the longer tracks. Now from the 10-minute to the 20-minute mark, we have some change of pace in which we get more of acoustic guitar playing more than the electric guitars. Now of course this is all George is doing, and he shows us his true virtuosousness on the guitars. He plays fantastically. I think this might have been the first album in which I really appreciated the guitars on. The guitars on here, they're really melancholic, they're pretty sad, but they're also really lovely, and the way he does it and he plays them is so emotional. It feels like it's not written down. It does feel like he plays from the bottom of his heart, and that the music on here really does mean a lot to him. Now from the 20-minute to the 30-minute mark, we get good music, yes, that is, but what we do get are amazing lyrics. Now, coming from a Norwegian band whose English is not their native language, it's really interesting to get to see some really good lyricism on it. Now, I think that all throughout this track we've got a lot of beautiful, beautiful lyrics, but on here there's a certain part which really drove home how much lyrics are important to each song, and it's by this quote that I'm gonna read off to you right now. I left my body, come meet me in my dreams. It's been so long, would you know me? Now, I have a script for this part, but I was writing it and hoping I would not be tearing up right now, because this section is pretty hard for me to read, because this album connects with me on a more personal level than any album I've listened to probably ever. You see, about 5 years ago, I actually lost my mother to cancer, and that is a really important part of my life. It's really hard, and something about this entire piece and this quote in particular really resonated with me, because in some way when you lose someone you really care deeply about and you really want to see them again, the only place you can really see them again as they were is in your dreams. You can meet them again, you don't really control that, they just sometimes appear. And it's really, really important for everyone who has lost someone to try and get a better, resolution with that person. And I can truly resonate with this quote when it says that I'll be there in your dreams and hopefully you'll still recognize me when I come there. I don't know, man, this part just really hits me hard, but I guess we gotta move on with this video. So let's talk about the 30 minutes to 40 minute section. So this particular section I would part into two subsections, which being the first part and the latter half of it. So the first part of it really made me and drove home the realization that the guitars on here are amazing. I said this earlier, but I'm gonna say it again and now put more emphasis on it. Usually I review these albums and I don't talk about the guitar work a lot because I don't find it to be all that interesting all the time, but here specifically I think that what Short is doing with his guitar playing is truly masterful. He is a virtuoso of his instrument, and I think it's truly lovely because he gets everything that he wants to get across in the way that he plays. If you're gonna listen to this album, really listen to the guitars, enjoy them, feel them, because that's what they are. They are emotions put onto sound form. And that is of course without even speaking about the lyrics found on here, which were also written by him. Basically, he is the mastermind that made this album be so amazing. Now, on the latter half of these minutes, we get probably what is the most unique section on this entire album. We get 5 minutes of female vocals with saxophone overlaid on top of them. So you have this lovely, lovely vocal work by a female singer, which has this solo of a saxophone on it, and they meld together in something which is truly marvelous. And I don't think I can really describe it to you. Also, what I am going to say, it truly revels Claire Story's performance on The Great Gig in the Sky, so that should give you some perspective of how good it is. So from the 40 minutes to the 50 minutes mark, we come back to the more metallic feel of this album. We are introduced to something that sounds quite like a metallic ballad in some way, which is really something I never really expected to hear. and we also get what is arguably the best guitar solo found on this album, which just goes to show that even after so long within this album, you still get amazing parts, and it's all worth it for the entire duration of the listen. Now, from 50 minutes to the end of this album, we get some interesting things, and probably the most prominent one is the sitar on here. We get some Arab influenced music and we get some great sitar playing. Now, if you know anything, sitar is not usually an instrument found in Western music as a whole, let alone in prog, let alone never actually found on metal music. So the fact that they actually use this instrument on here really means a lot in the innovation that this album puts forth. And towards the end, we do get a recurring motive from the beginning of this album, which really felt like ages ago by this point. And then this album is just over. It's finished. It's done. And I don't know how to tell you this, guys, but somehow Green Carnation just somehow made this a singular song, and it does feel like one song. It doesn't feel like multiple songs stitched together. It doesn't feel like they had a lot of ideas and just put them all together in a bucket, shook it up a bit, and made this one long continuous track. And although this is definite prog and a lot of different motives and ideas and concepts are all featured inside of here, I still feel like from start to finish, you do not feel like you've shifted to other realms of different genres and different motives and different songs. This is still Light of Day, Day of Darkness. And do I really have to tell you that I love this track? Like, do I really have to tell you how good this album is? It's amazing. Everything from the lyrics to the playing and what's in between is so good. And I think we should just move on and talk about this cover so we can get on to the rating. So overall, when talking about the cover for this album, I think it does fall kind of short. I don't believe it has anything a lot that says in it. I believe that it's kind of overcrowded by a lot of things, the branches, the colors, the framing that is, and the symbols on the walls. There's a lot of things found on it, but none of them really feel like they have anything to do with the ideas and symbolism that this album holds. I do think that this would have been perfect if this album had a different cover that would drive home the point and the conceptual idea of this album even more. But I am not an expert in cover making and I do not know what that cover would look like, so I guess we just have to stick with what we've got. So when it comes to the rating of this album receives a 9 out of 10. Now the reason it's not a 10 out of 10 is because I still have to stay somewhat grounded and somewhat realistic and understand that this still is one track which is an hour long, and I would not go ahead and sit on a track like this at any given day, probably, unless I really have some time that I want to dedicate to this, because this is something you don't just put on in the background and forget about. This is something that I truly believe has to be listened to with all attention and actual appreciation for the music found on here. And you know what, no matter what type of music you like, if you found yourself by accident watching this video, or if you like this type of music, or if you know this album, if you are going to give it a listen, please do as I say and actually put some time into it and listen to this album as a whole. Don't just give in and do other things whilst it's running in the background. Please, when you listen to this, appreciate it for what it is. Now, as is usual for this show, I take my favorite track off of each album and put it on a playlist which has all my favorite tracks from the albums we've reviewed so far. And I was doubting whether I should take this one long track and put it on this list, but I decided on doing so. Now, it's funny because now I have a playlist which I usually listen to on shuffle, and I know in the bottom of my heart that there is a chance that I will get this 1 hour long song when I just want to wash the dishes for like 15 minutes. But those are problems that I would have to deal with on my own. But that is about it for today, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow, because we're going to be listening to Uncle Meat by the Mothers of Invention, which is somewhat a Frank Zappa album. So if you're a Zappa fan, please do come listen to this, because this is going to be a wild ride. But that is about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this one. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.